Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of CI Diaries, sponsored by Wayside Publishing. My name is Kristy Placido.
And I'm Carrie Toth, and we are going to talk about comprehensible questions and how we use comprehensible questions to engage our students in classroom discussion. So, Kristy, how do you use comprehensible questions to start discussion in your classroom?
Well, first of all, I think this is something that you can do from day one of level one. You can be teaching in the target language. There are some little tricks to keeping it comprehensible, which we're going to share with you. But in level one, I start out, and I actually do this in level two as well. I start out with something that you may have heard of called card talk. I know, Carrie, you use the same technique in your classes. And with card talk, what I have my students do, I give them an index card and I ask them to draw a picture of something that they are very interested in. And I just tell them it can't be sleeping and it has to be school appropriate. So they draw whatever activity that they like on their card. And then I just take the stack of cards and every day I'll just go through a few of those cards and I'll ask the students comprehensible questions about whatever it is that they've said that they're interested in. I use discussion quite frequently. So, I mean, it could be personalized types of discussion like card talk, or it could be anything that we happen to be talking about or reading about, no matter what.
We do card talk too, and it's nice because you can adapt that then at each level. We do the same as you, something that they're interested in at level one, and at level two, we talk about what happened, anything that happened over the summer. It doesn't have to be a vacation. It can be anything they did over the summer. In level three, we talk about 3 goals that they have for the school year. We laughed this year because we had a student who said that he was only going to miss 2 days of school all year long. That was his goal. And I kind of laughed. I thought that was a strange goal to have, but come to find out, I mean, he missed about 50 days this school year. And I thought, well, his goal went straight out the window, but apparently it was a very lofty goal for him when he set it at the beginning of the school year. And in level 4, we use the conditional to set our kind of savings goals. If I were to save this much money, I would spend it on this. And so it lets you cultivate different kinds of grammatical things that you would like to work on with your students, but still getting to know them better. I feel like it gives you a chance to use these comprehensible questions to cultivate that community that we like to have in our language classroom.
Totally. I agree. And I think, like for me, card talk is such an easy way to get started. So if you're a teacher who's kind of new to ADI and you're looking for a way to just kind of dip your toe in the water a little bit, an activity like card talk is a really like low pressure activity. It's something you can do. You can just focus on one student each day until you've gone through the entire class. So it's just really low pressure, low stress. There's no real expectation for what the outcome is going to be. So it's a really good way to just kind of try it out.
I agree. And it gives you kind of an ease back into the school year because it really does take about 6 days of the beginning of the school year to get to know everybody in the classroom and to let them get to know each other as you're getting back in. As you move forward from that, for my level ones, we try to let level one be, we want them to be as immersed as possible in language from the beginning. And we find that narrative is the best way to do that. We want it to feel kind of effortless, and we want as many to stay enrolled throughout our program as possible. And so we've chosen to do that through different types of stories. So whether it be reading readers or doing clip chats, movie talks, picture talks, telling stories, we do those different things with questioning techniques. And so we ask them different types of questions through our stories at the very beginning levels and even into level 2. And we try to work in stories that dip them into different cultural types of experiences, different eating experiences, and different travel experiences that they might have, and different speakers, visitors to our classroom that, guest speakers that can come in and just share like a little snippet of life in their own country. And so we just want to expose them to the beauty of these countries where the language is spoken, so that they'll develop their own love of the language, so that they'll want to continue on.
Right.
So having them learn language through asking questions to them, but keeping them comprehensible. How do you do that in your lower and then in your upper levels?
So everything builds, as we know, everything builds on everything else that we do. So I think it's actually way easier to do this in an upper level class. The upper levels are kind of where it's not even as much about teaching the language as it is just about what new thing can we discuss today, or what new thing can we learn about today. But in the beginning, if you're able to lay that foundation of, this is what we do in this class, we speak Spanish, that's just going to be what they expect for the rest of their time as a language student. So yeah, in the beginning is when there are some kind of tricks to being able to make your questions comprehensible. One of the things that we've already kind of touched on is talking about topics that are already familiar to the students. So like with Card Talk, we're talking about the students themselves. So we're using very familiar topics, things that they already can relate to. They don't really have to do much visualizing to imagine, Jordan likes to eat pizza, or, Alyssa likes to skateboard. Those are things that are really part of their daily lives that they can easily envision. Another thing that I think is something that is a super helpful tool, but it's also something you have to approach with a tiny bit of caution. I use a lot of cognates in my discussions, and I do always mention cognates with a caveat. Not every word that we think is a cognate is also a cognate to our students. So you do still have to kind of be looking for that blank look of not comprehending, because they don't always get it just because it's a cognate. So those are two things that I find to be extremely helpful with beginners.
I even found this year ironia. In a junior level class, we read the word ironia, and they looked blankly at me, and I said, it's irony.
And sometimes sometimes they don't hear it, but if you write the cognate.
What is that?
Yeah. If you write the cognate on the board.
But they still, after they knew what it was, we had, a couple of kids were like, really? Yeah. You guys don't know what irony is?
We had that come up recently. We had that come up recently with the word prudente. They did not know the word prudent in English either. So it's like, okay, if it's a cognate but it's not part of their vocabulary, that is also not a cognate.
I was a little shocked about the irony being, but they, it's the end of the year, so maybe they knew irony and they had just forgotten.
Maybe they just weren't listening or something.
I won't tell their English teacher that. The second class came in and they knew what irony was. Yeah, but the first group of Spanish 3 was a little lost on that.
Yeah, so you do have to be a little cautious with cognates. And then another thing, kind of a tangent to cognates, is using proper nouns in your discussion. Mm-hmm. So if you're dealing with really, really early beginning students, maybe instead of teaching them the word store, maybe just saying Walmart or H&M or whatever. Maybe store isn't really like a word that you're targeting that day that they need to be learning, but you want to talk about buying something. That's just kind of a little way of cheating, not having to introduce a new vocabulary word, but still getting the point across. So that's another little trick.
And then as you get up into the upper levels, you can work in grammar targets as chunks into your questions. We were just this last week, we're working on a healthcare unit. And one of the things that I really want to expose them to is subjunctive in context, because they need to get that mood into their ear. And so we've been, well, what do you recommend that he take? And so I've been trying to ask them a lot of questions with the subjunctive as the stem of the question, and giving them either or choices to begin the unit, because at the end of the unit, I'd really like them to be producing their own answers and their own statements using these subjunctive structures that I'm trying to work into our conversations now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can say it enough. If you are teaching for acquisition, you've got to front load with the input before you can expect students to output. So yeah, if they've not heard those subjunctive phrases enough times and heard them in logical context, that's going to be impossible for them to produce. So, and I would also just add to that, it's okay to use the subjunctive even in a level 1 or 2 class. I mean, we don't have to just suddenly start using the subjunctive. It's just that we're not going to be expecting a level 1 or 2 student to produce that grammar structure. And they might produce that grammar structure, just randomly because it's something that they've heard. So we don't shelter grammar. We make it comprehensible. So, and then I thought of one other thing that I think is really valuable for teachers in terms of making everything very comprehensible from the beginning. And I know you do this too, Carrie. Is using your wall space to provide basic information that you're going to need during your discussion. So for me, a big one is question word posters. And then another one that I have on my wall is I have a big poster of all the numbers written out and how to say each number. And if I'm saying a number and they're not understanding me, I can point to that poster and give them a little extra support. So I do a lot of pause, point to my poster, and then start talking again.
And I think sometimes people think it's silly to keep the question word posters up, but those question words are so close in the way that they look and sound. I've taken, I can't tell you how many German classes at different conferences, and I cannot get my German question words straight.
Yeah.
I just don't know why, but I can't get them straight. So having the German question words posted on the wall helps me. If I don't understand the question word, I struggle to be able to understand what's being asked of me. And so I noticed that there are students right away that understand what I'm asking, but I also have students that look up at the question word, and then as soon as they see what that word means, they can answer back just fine. So I don't see the harm in having them posted. And so I do keep them up all year long.
I do too. And honestly, once students have acquired those question words, they are not still looking at the question posters. So, it's
only the ones that really need the scaffold.
Right. And, to me, for them to have that little aid in understanding the rest of what the discussion is, that's not really problematic for me. And they will eventually acquire those question words because that's something that I'm using every single day in class. So it's not as though they're never going to acquire the question words just because I have them written down somewhere. So
another thing that I have on my wall is some rejoinder phrases.
Yes.
And I like having those because they give students something to reply back at the beginning levels. It gives them something like, oh, wow, or I didn't know, or you don't say. Yeah. Whenever I've asked a question and somebody has answered it, it gives them something to answer back. So it almost makes a conversation out of whatever we're talking about in the classroom and gives them a little word to add on at the end. So there are ways to use, and I have in those rejoinders, you're right, you're wrong, and I agree and I disagree, because when you do take the questions a little further into a class discussion, a lot of times students will say, well, I can't answer because so-and-so took my answer. Right. But to build a really good discussion, you can then say, oh, well, Kristy's right because, and then if they can just give a little reason why Kristy is right, man, they are getting deep into using their target language to explain why, like to give a rationale as to why Kristy's right. Now we're into some solid intermediate language. And so, we've used our questions. We're getting a really good discussion going. So we're building, that's where the depth comes in. If you can ask good questions and then provide them the tools that they need to answer and to answer with depth.
And I also think just speaking in general can create a lot of anxiety for students. So if they feel supported, it definitely will lower their anxiety level and lower that affective filter so that they are able to just focus on the topic at hand and not so much on all their inner turmoil of having to speak.
Yes.
So I thought...
And I tell people a lot of times sorry
okay.
to interrupt you. I tell people a lot of times at conferences, and I don't know if this is, an embarrassment to admit or not. I give on speaking grades, if a student completes the assignment on the speaking grade and completes it to, whatever I've asked them to do, if I've, given them the assignment and they've completed it, I give them the full credit, because what we've seen in the data is that our students, national averages that students in a 4-year program are scoring around the intermediate low to mid range. And so my students, when they perform on their speaking in class, they're performing at that level, when they're doing the tasks I ask them to do. So, at that intermediate mid to low level, they still make mistakes. I shouldn't be looking at them for grammatical correctness and stuff, because intermediate mids and lows are not grammatically correct. That's advanced low, that they start to have any kind of grammatical correctness. So they automatically, as long as they have done this and done what I asked them to do, completed it, they get the full credit on a speaking assessment. And so that kind of lowers their affective filter too, to know that if I participate in this and I do what I'm supposed to do, I'm going to get full credit. Then, we can all kind of relax and just have fun talking to each other.
Yeah. And isn't that a nice way to end a school year, having fun, right?
It is.
So I was thinking, for people who are new to this whole concept of ADI, I am so sorry. That's my phone. So
somebody really wants to talk to you.
I was thinking that it might be helpful to just talk about what are some of the types of questions that you can ask students, and then what do you do if you ask a question and you're not getting a response, or you can just see that they're not understanding. How do you handle that? So what are some of the types of questions that can be asked of students?
Well, I think at the most basic level, you have the either or choice and I say at the most basic level, but that doesn't mean it is only for level 1, because even at level 3 and 4, when you're bringing in new content, or when, like I said, with this Spanish 3 unit, we're doing some subjunctive verbs. So I'm presenting a new structure that they don't know how to work with yet and manipulate yet. So I need to give them some either or choices until they've internalized and acquired this structure. So I would begin with some either or choices, and then you can move out into letting them have some more control over the variables. So I guess you go through the who, what, when, where, why, how. When you get up into the hows and the whys, then they're creating with language. And so that's how you scaffold for those superstar students. If you ask them which of these two, then that's kind of for your, that's the scaffold where anybody in the class can get this. Everybody that's paying attention right now can get this. But when you get up to the whys and the hows, then this is where your really star students are going to be able to shine, and they're going to be able to give you the big productive answers on those.
And I would also just add on to what you're saying. If, let's say, you are teaching a level 1 class and you want to ask them a why question, but it's going to be probably more than they can handle. What if you were to give them some different possibilities? like, why do you think? And you could like list some different possibilities for them and then let them choose from the different options that you're giving them. So there's always ways to kind of back it up, make it a little more comprehensible. And the same thing, if you ask a question of a student and they're just like blank stare, just try giving them two choices. And it takes the pressure off them too, because they kind of know you're going to like swoop in and you're never going to just like leave them with their blank stare and their silence.
Hanging
there.
You're
always going to kind of come in and rescue them. And then another question type that you didn't mention, but I know you do this, but one that I love to do, and I think this is especially fun in the lower level classes too, ask a question that's kind of off the wall and like the answer is going to be like, obviously not, but just ask them kind of like a silly question that the answer's clearly no, but then if they giggle at that, then they understood you because it's going to be a silly question to them. So that it's fun to just kind of keep them on their toes a little bit and just throw something like that at them every now and then.
It's a good comprehension check, because if they do laugh, you know that they're following and tracking what you're saying. And if nobody laughs,
right.
That you're off the rails.
And then I would also say too, it's a good idea to, after you get the answer back from the student, to kind of just recast that answer back to the class. And then by repeating the answer that the student gave and modeling it in totally correct language, you're validating the student who gave the answer. And at the same time, you're giving the students another repetition of whatever the information was that you were talking about. And you're probably giving them a repetition of some language structures that you're maybe trying to get them to have a little bit more experience with as well. So, yeah.
And getting multiple, if Kristy answers and Carrie answers, then you say, well, class, let's vote. Do you think what Kristy said or what Carrie said is the, best choice? So you really can get just a lot of great language input as you go through and ask a lot of questions about the things that you're reading or that you've been discussing in the classroom. And it can be anything. It could be an authentic piece that you're reading. It could be a topic that you're studying. You could be studying ocean plastics. You could be studying, it could be a story that you told about, a hammerhead shark that swam through your classroom. It doesn't have to be deep. It could be deep. It could be literally anything that you're asking these questions about. Your goal is just to have language flowing through the classroom that is helping keep the students engaged and also acquiring.
Yeah, and I would just say, no matter what time of year it is, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, it's the end of the school year for us. But it's never too early and it's never too late to try having a comprehensible conversation with your students using comprehensible questions. So we hope that you will try this. And we also hope that you'll connect with us and let us know what other questions do you have? Did something that we said bring up another question in your mind? We'd love to hear from you. So reach out to us by email, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. We would love to hear from you. And to those of you that have already reached out, keep it coming. We love feedback. So keep it coming, please.
Yes. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you. And we hope to see you soon. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with episode 5.
Have a great day. Bye.